to.
Okay, so welcome everyone. This is our special meeting of council, June the 22nd, and it's live streamed. So welcome to everybody that's watching it. And we're going to begin our meeting with a motion by Ian Straight and seconded by Klaus Vandermeer. Well, I guess Klaus isn't with us. So can somebody else second that, please? Thanks, Jeff. That the special meeting of council dated, council agenda dated June this 22nd, 2021 be approved as circulated. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I'll also remind all of council that if you have any disclosure of interest, you can declare it now or anytime during the meeting. And I did miss our the first thing on the agenda. I don't think it was always on our last special meeting, but we will have our moment of silence now that we usually have right at the very beginning. So if we can have a moment of silence, please. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, everyone. So also, as we're just opening the meeting, I also want to say, I think we have both Forbes and Carl with us. So welcome to the two of you. And we'll look forward to your reports in a moment. I'm going to move on. I have a motion. It was, well, it was also moved by Klaus, but I need a mover for this one. Moved by Karen Jennings, please. Thank you. Second by Jeff Carroll, that the minutes of the regular meeting of council, June the 15th, 2021, special meeting of council, June 15th, 2021, be approved as circulated. All in favor? And that is carried. Do we have any business arising from those minutes? Okay, seeing none, we're moving on to our very first, well, we have no delegations, I should mention that tonight. And there was no business arising from the minutes. So we're going to move on to our first report of the municipal officer. And I see you there, Carl, please. And this, welcome there, Carl.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Council.
Yeah, so this is going to be our, regarding our amendment to Section 34 of the Clean Water Act. And I'll give the screen over to you. So welcome, Carl. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reeve. Good evening, everyone. This report, as it relates to Montague Township, is largely housekeeping in nature. There won't be a significant impact, but there are some amendments coming down the pipeline that are proposed to the Mississippi Rideau Source Protection Plan. The Source Protection Plan, as council will recall, is intended to protect municipal water intakes, especially around wells and around communal public wells and water intake, but also identify hazards as it relates to source protection across the entire Mississippi and Rideau watershed. So based on some work that's part of the policy there too, as council will recall, is that wellhead protection areas and intake protection zones have been mapped and identified around municipal intakes. So we have a couple of those in Montague Township. So the municipality of North Grenville, so the area around Kempville, they are currently undertaking a new well and other development expansions of their municipal water treatment system. And based on that, the scientists involved in that process have identified some changes to the wellhead protection area. The wells around Kempville tie into are part of the same aquifer as or the broader aquifer as Merrickville's wells. So that that's resulted in a changes to, or proposed changes to the wellhead protection area that extends into a portion of Montague Township. So this would actually reduce the size of the wellhead protection area in Montague Township. So there are some source protection policies related to these wellhead protection areas, and based on they've been approved by the province through the source protection plan, approved by the municipality through amendments to ROP and zoning bylaw, but have required a couple of risk management plans for certain activities happening on two sites in Montague Township. So these sites would actually be removed from the coverage if this amendment is approved. So the Conservation Authority staff have helpfully provided an explanatory note that's been attached to this report, and also some mapping that are showing essentially the decreased scope of this wellhead protection area. So ultimately, the Source Protection Authority is looking for concurrence from all affected municipalities that they're in agreement of that, and from our perspective, we have no reason not to provide that concurrence. It appears that this would have very little overall impact on Montague Township. There would be some changes to some of our mapping, which we capture at the next OP review. So the Source Protection Authority has attached a resolution at the beginning of the report that they're looking for council's concurrence. So I'll leave that. I'll leave it there and let council discuss and direct on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I'm just wondering, does this approval by the municipalities who are involved have to be unanimous? Yes, Carl.
I expect it likely does. Certainly, if there is a municipality that has an objection, then that I would imagine that would be conveyed to the Source Protection Authority to address. But my expectation is they're going to seek unanimity if at all possible.
I think they did once before, I think so. Thank you. So I'll open this up to council if anybody has any questions or comments. Jeff?
Just one quick one for Carl, Reeve. So the way I see that shift is, does that kind of take what we have kind of set up as our industrial zone out of that watershed then? Am I reading that map sort of, or does it?
I'm just going into the mapping here.
But it's the other, like watershed out of North Grenville, I think, isn't it? Or is it a bigger area? Yes, Carol, thanks.
So the wellhead protection area mapping does not include does not cover the township's business park just north of the town of Smith Falls. It covers areas, most of the area along the Highway 43 corridor between Smith Falls and Merrickville. The areas and that's where the boundary is reduced on as indicated on the map there. The orange line is the previous boundary, the blue line is proposed boundary. The areas to the north of town or the north of the town of Smith Falls are part of the intake protection zone. So those lands are mapped as sensitive and specific, where there's specific policies that apply to protect the Smith Falls water intake, and that's not proposed to change as part of this exercise. if there were to changes to that intake protection zone, then that would be a separate conversation we'd have with council.
Great. Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Jeff. Ian, please.
Mute, bud.
You're on mute there, Ian.
Oh,
I apologize. I don't know how I got on mute, but I got muted anyway. Thanks, Carl, for helping us understand this. I guess my question to you is, it says that these aquifers are highly vulnerable. Like, why are municipalities that live on, like, so I'm going to say the Rideau Canal and have these availability to surface water similar to what Smith Falls is? Why do they not have a water treatment plant that doesn't drill a well multiple hundred feet into the ground that can cause extensive problems for many people? Why do they not just do something more similar to, I think, what Smith Falls does? I might be wrong, but
Just to clarify your question, Councillor, you're wondering why why Merrickville and Kemptville are using communal municipal wells to service their municipalities, as opposed to intakes from the local river.
yeah, more like a water treatment plant. I think is that not what happens in the town?
That is what happens in the town. That's an excellent question, Councillor. I don't know the immediate answer as to why that was, how these municipalities have made decisions on in terms of how they'd be directly servicing them. But I'll welcome feedback from Joanna or Forbes, who've had experience working with other municipalities, other urban municipalities who have different ways of servicing. If Forbes or Joanna can respond to that.
yes, Forbes.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with simply the way the community evolved. One of the things that's unique about the Kemptville and the Merrickville wells is that they go into the Nepean aquifer, which is below the Oxford aquifer, which is where most of the domestic wells in the area would go down into the Oxford aquifer. By going into the very deep Nepean aquifer, there is a level of protection to the municipal water source that you wouldn't get if it was on the river. But I think, Ian, the straight up answer is that it's how the community evolved, right? Perth and Smith Falls had a pipe in the river. Kemptville had a pipe into the ground. So it just varies from community to community.
No, thanks.
And I think I read in the report that the aquifer, the Nepean aquifer, is so much deeper. It's not. It doesn't have quite as much of an effect. Is that true? Yeah. Jeff.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Reeve.
Thanks. Yes, Jeff.
Or that's good. That kind of spurred like a kind of thought in my head, and I'd like to weigh in on a little bit on that. Is so I guess like where we have issues sometimes where we might get a bad water quality test in Montague. Would, like, theoretically, if that were to happen, could someone just dig deeper, or dig, like, how deep in the ground is the Nepean sort of aquifer? And like, if someone gets like back to my original, if someone has bad water, or were to have a bad water test during like a one of the studies, and if they were to go deeper, would that solve that problem by going into those deeper aquifers? I don't know if Forbes or Carl, that's into your wheelhouse or not, or if it's if you don't mind.
Yes, Forbes.
I'll tell you, my experience is from when I worked with North Grenville, Jeff, and they actually put a regulation in place in their official plan and zoning bylaw that prohibited domestic wells going into the Nepean aquifer and kept them all up in the Oxford. Now, the Oxford in North Grenville is so highly charged, most of the wells are artesian, and they don't need to go down into the Nepean. It depends on where you are. Jeff, I really don't know the hydrology of your area well enough to say that if they went from 40 meters down to 60 meters, they would go from the Oxford to the Nepean. I don't know that well enough, but typically the well drillers try to keep the wells as shallow as possible because it's money going deeper. But if they don't get good water, there's always the Nepean that can go down to for sure.
Ian,
Just a quick question, maybe Forbes or Carl can answer, or Joanna. Like, how deep is it? Like, what would it cost? Or would anybody have an idea? Just a ballpark off the top of the cuff. What does something like that cost? No idea. Like, and so I would assume it comes up into a building, and then they treat the water, and then they pump it out to the residents.
In Kempville, each well is in a different location in or geography in the town, and then they get pumped to a central treatment facility where it gets treated to ministry MECP standards, and then it's released. But they bring all the water into one central location and then send it back out again once it's been treated.
Okay. Thank you.
good questions, everybody. Okay, I don't see any other questions here from council. So thank you for this, both Carl and Forbes. I'm going to read this motion. It was moved by Jeff Carroll and seconded by Karen Jennings that the committee received the following report. That's the amendment to section 34 of the Clean Water Act, and that the following be approved. That the council of the Township of Montague endorses the proposed amendment under section 34 of the Clean Water Act to revise the Mississippi Resource Protection Plan to add a new municipal well system for the municipality of North Granville into the Mississippi Resource Protection Plan and assessment reports. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're going to move on to our next report, and that's going to be yours, Forbes. That's on the official plan review. So thank you, Forbes, for this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Reeve. So I'm going to, I'll start off with a general statement. And then I'm not sure how council wants to go through this document. Reeve, we can do it line by line, or we can just sort of quickly go through, and if anybody has a comment on a certain section, we can then stop and discuss it.
Are you able to share it on the screen?
I am, Reeve, yes.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off saying that what the goal this evening is to get a draft of the official plan amendment that we can then circulate to government agencies for review and comment, and also hold a public meeting on and get comment. This is not the final version by any means. There will be multiple opportunities for council to tweak or change this document as we go forward. But for now, we're simply seeking a document that you would be able to authorize the staff and myself to proceed for comment and review. I'm going to now try to share my screen. Dun, 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 dun. It's not the one I wanted, sorry. Just a sec, just a sec,
Okay.
council. Okay. So do you see this, council?
Yes,
Yes, yeah,
So this is the amendment that,
I see it.
very good. So this is the official plan amendment that I worked with Carl and Joanna. We've sort of collaborated. I was their worker bee, and I think that they quite enjoyed having me as their junior planner to direct. So, but we'll leave that. The first 4 points of the amendment are related to the introduction section of the official plan. The first point clarifies that Rosedale and Andrewsville are the primary locations for growth in hamlets within your community. The next statement is one of a series of statements that's being recommended that go into your official plan that acknowledge and recognize the Anishinaabe peoples to be the first inhabitants of Montague Township. The next point, number 3, talks about the business park as being a primary focus for employment lands within the municipality. That's the change that's in this section, is sort of putting the business park more front and center and hopefully getting more interest in that area for investment. The next part, again, is related to additional wording in your plan regarding Indigenous communities and the duty to consult. The next section of the amendment deals with changes to the general development policies in the official plan that are found in section 2. And this constitutes the majority of the changes that we're talking about. And this goes from item 5 to item 19. The first one deals with the economic policies. This is the preamble to the economic policies. It talks about the business park. It talks about being investment ready in the business park. It also highlights some flexibility and some tools that council may have to help promote and stimulate growth and development of the business park. I think one other thing that's included in this is the section that talks about the fact that not all growth is good growth, and that some growth comes with a price tag, and that there are some negative impacts associated with scattered rural residential development, and that these financial issues need to be considered by council when you're reviewing development applications. The next section highlights policy changes to your energy policy, and this is to pick up on some of the new wording from the provincial policy statement, but also to recognize that larger scale energy projects are possible within Montague, where in the past they weren't recognized as something that could happen. The next section is a new section that deals with secondary dwelling units. I know council's had a lot of discussion with Carl on this, and we've picked up that work. And this implements the provincial policy statement as well as the policies in the Planning Act regarding additional secondary units, both within a house as well as detached within communities. The important thing to keep in mind with this policy, council, is that the details for this policy will be found in your zoning bylaw. This is more of a general motherhood statement, and the others, the zoning bylaw will have all the details. And we'll get into things such as mobile homes and things of that nature in the zoning. The next changes, Reeve and Council, 8 through to 12 are all just editing wording requested by the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines. The change in number 13 relates to consultation with First Nations when you're doing archaeological assessments, and it also clarifies that it's the ministry's archaeological checklist that you're working from in terms of determining whether you need an archaeological assessment or not. The next section deals with another issue that was brought forward by the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines, and that's acknowledgement that there is a small pocket of karst topography. I think it's located in the southeast corner of the municipality. And these are the policies that would relate to development in that area. Karst topography is underground caves and hollowed out limestone areas. So you have to be careful when you're doing development in these areas. They are highly sensitive to impacts from septic systems in particular, which then can cause problems with wells. One of the new changes or enhancements to your official plan is a natural heritage system that shows the wetlands, ANSIs, rivers, lakes, things of that nature. They were all brought into one map, and there were linkages and corridors that were identified. Your official plan actually went further than any other in Lanark County in identifying linkages and corridors, and this was a relatively simple undertaking for us to do because you had done so much work in the past. The one thing is that it wasn't clear what can and can't happen in these linkage corridors. And so we did research, and it was determined that they're treated like wildlife habitat. And so that was put in there for clarification. The next one again is consulting the First Nations with environmental impact where there's native values that have been identified. The next statement is, I think, one of the more important changes that's being recommended for you, and that is to consider communal sewage treatment systems within the municipality, whether they're publicly owned or owned by a condominium or a single owner. One of the things that we've put in here is that there are implications for municipal responsibility with communal systems, and that the township is not obliged to approve the use of communal systems. However, once you do approve the use, there will be a need for a responsibility agreement, and you would have to be a signature to that agreement. So the decision point is whether to do a communal system or not do a communal system. Once you decide to do it, there is a clear path and track that you have to stay on. The next section, 19, is the new section of the plan. We've brought all of the policies related to the Rideau Canal and the UNESCO World Heritage Site. We've brought them into one location so that it's going to be easier for your planner. It's going to be easier for people that are in, speaking of development in and around the canal. And this is very much wording that's seen in all of the official plans along the entire Rideau corridor. And they're pretty straightforward for the most part. The next section is section 3 of your official plan, and this is where all the land use policies are. There are some wording or name changes that are in the first few. And then there is also new policies in the natural heritage section A that relate to recognizing that in rural areas, the natural heritage features are common and that they may be a constraint and limit development. And this is said both in the rural and in the agricultural policies. There's again a reference to the karst topography in both 24 and 25. And then again, reiterating the policies stated above from the natural heritage systems about the fact that there are limitations to development in the rural area because of these natural heritage features. The next important section is section 28, and this is a reworking of the policies related to your business park. It clarifies the range of uses that can be permitted in that area. All those uses that are identified would meet with approval for the lands being within the source water protection zone. We also clarified the limitations because it's in that, source water intake zone. And so really the limitations are you can't be applying organic nutrients in that area, so no manure. You can't apply pesticides in that area. And there are concerns about stormwater ponds serving large geographies. I think this helps dispel the myths that the business park is basically not being developed because it's in the source water protection zone. The source water protection zone is not a big issue for this property. And so we wanted that clarified in the policies. And again, we talk about some of the options that council can have to promote and advance the growth and development of the business park and deal with minimizing red tape. We also had discussions about potentially expanding range of options around the airport lands. We've talked about aviated related land uses as being the principle of that area, but also that new commercial and industrial development that's sensitive to the airports could be considered as well. This is a policy regarding the settlement areas, and it's designed to give council tools to be able to encourage and incent development in Rosedale and Andrewsville settlement areas. And again, giving council tools that were there in the past but weren't clearly spelled out in your official plan. The other thing that we've done in the official plan for settlement areas is recognize a broader range of uses, including on-farm diversified uses and agriculturally related uses. And we did add in secondary dwelling units as well. So this is a more robust range of uses that can happen in your hamlets as you go forward. The other section related to the hamlets is that the plans of subdivision are going to be promoted and encouraged over the use of severances. I think severances start undermining the likelihood that you would ever get subdivision development. And so what I've done is I borrowed from other hamlet policies that I'm familiar with that limit consents to infilling and rounding out, which is a very, very common policy approach, and that generally subdivisions are the preferred form of development for hamlets. The agricultural policies are expanded with an expanded range of permitted uses, particularly associated with agritourism and on-farm diversified land uses and agriculturally related uses. These are all areas detailed in the provincial policy statement that really did require clarification in your plan. And hopefully this is going to make it so that there's much less red tape for farmers that wish to diversify on site with agriculturally related or farm produce types of advanced processing and manufacturing, typically at a small scale. It also adds in agritourism as a use as well. The final section deals with the implementation policies of your official plan. The next statement is related to the constraint and limitations that the natural heritage features may have in development in the rural area. One of the big changes, Council, is in the next section. We have not changed the consent policies related to the number of severances. However, there is a statement in here that says that notwithstanding the above policies, where an application for consent has frontage on a township road that's been classified as deficient in the 2020 roads need study as amended, council shall limit the number of consents to a maximum of one new lot. That is a policy change for you. The next section deals with clarification of strip development. You did have policies that discourage strip development, but they weren't defined. And there was no sort of indication of why strip development is a bad thing. And so we did make efforts to capture the rationale for the policy at that introductory paragraph. One new form of development that we've talked about that we're recommending is this idea of cluster lot development. This is a small little subdivision with a private road done through the consent process. And it's a policy that started in Mississippi Mills. It has been in North Grenville. I don't think it's there now. They've used it up in Renfrew County a fair bit. It's actually in the new county official plan, and it's also in Lanark Highlands as well. So these are the policies that are pretty much standard throughout all those documents related to cluster lot development. And then the final thing is to add the land use, the new land use schedule related to the natural heritage system mapping. Those are the contents of the amendment that were presented to you at the last meeting, Council. Since that time, there has been a lot of discussion throughout the county, beyond the county boundaries, and involving most of the area planners regarding hydrogeologic studies. And your policies would be improved with the policy that I've included at the end of the planning report that's submitted for this evening. Myself and staff are requesting your leave to add that in, those new hydrogen screening policies into this amendment to be able to have it go forward and included in your official plan. And Reeve, that is my report. I'm very happy to answer any detailed questions that you may have going forward. with the specifics of the amendment.
All right, thank you, Forbes. I know that there's probably going to be some questions, but for now, thank you for this very, very, very thoughtful, factual report. It's just great, and I think the detail that you've gone into has certainly given us a pretty good groundwork to have another discussion. I know we've had many already, but it's starting to come together into a nice little draft, I think. So thank you for everything so far.
You're welcome.
I do have 3 or 4 questions, but I'm going to open it up to council first, and we'll hear from them. The first person is Claus. Hi, Claus.
Hi, Reeve. Thank you. Apologize for being late. I ran late for work. But anyway, Forbes, thanks for the report. It's very good, very detailed and so forth. My question is on the hydrological studies. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly. You're saying it's well talked around the county and so forth. A lot of other townships are doing it. How expensive are these studies? Can you...
They don't have to be that expensive. Typically what we do is we look for wells that are within a couple of 100 meters of where the site is being developed. And the sort of the cheap way is if there's wells around there and you can get the neighbors to give you water samples to be able to just test those wells and look at those existing wells. And something like that can come in the neighborhood of about $2,500. If there isn't wells in the area and they need to drill a well to do the testing, that gets into the $5,000 to $7,000 range. But the reality is that when the lot's created, if the lot's created, they do have that well on it. The other thing that I think is really important when we start talking about costs of these studies is to realize how valuable the lots are these days. And there's rarely a lot in the rural area in Lanark County these days that's less than, $75,000, and I've seen them up over $100,000.
Yeah. If I may, Reeve, just to follow up, a lot of the other townships, of course, are requesting to be able to do this. Is there any assistance in these costs, or is the landowner picking up the tab?
The landowner picks up the tab on this. It's the same as everything else, Deputy Reeve. It's proponent driven. The developer always pays, even if it's just you're a mom and pop and you just want to create a severed lot. But it is money that has to be invested to be able to realize the lot created. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, please.
Sorry, just on that note with those studies, can we also have it where we could start to map where those studies have been done in our township, and start to track that a little bit, and then we could utilize even, and would it be a possibility of utilizing some of those to start to track and see where maybe there's problems and maybe where there's not problems, and if there was, say, like in this area, there was already a few studies over the last few years that have been done and they've all been good. And it's another one of those things where, like, I mean, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing, but is there a way that we can track it? Then we get an idea of, we know where the bad and the good sort of is, but also it might ease some of those, that the need or the thought for some of those as we kind of venture on.
Councillor, I think that's a wonderful idea. And I don't think that we've done enough historically to be able to track these types of things. And now that there are GIS tools available, I think that it would be something you'd want to sit down with Carl and Joanna and work out a sort of a protocol on how to do it. And the other thing is we have to be sensitive that these are studies that have been paid for by the private individual, and sharing them sometimes can have some issues. Now, if they're submitted as a matter a public record with an application. They're a public document. But I think that the using your GIS tools and services that you have at your hand in the township to track that information is a very, very good idea.
Don't see any of the questions right now. I have a couple though for you, Forbes, if you don't mind, please. You mentioned at the beginning that the two sort of main focus areas in the township for development was Rosedale and Andrewsville. Even though we have 7 settlement areas in Montague, I don't actually recall, now we may have, but I don't recall us saying that we 100% wanted settlement only, well, mainly in those 2 areas. Did we do that? I just always thought that we just said, okay, we've got 7 settlement areas. This is where we want to settle.
My recollection and what was identified in the issues and options report that we discussed in some detail was the idea that we would highlight the 2 that have the greatest potential for growth and development. And that we would highlight those. It doesn't mean that the others aren't hamlets and they can't be developed. It's just that these are the priority areas for council going forward.
Yes. And like, because when I don't have any figures on this, but certainly when you drive around the township, when we started talking about this, I think I was mentioning and wondering if we would ever have an 8th settlement area, that being near the Ottawa border. Mm-hmm. And so just since we actually have even been talking about this OP review, you may as well almost call a new area on the border a new settlement area, because there's so many new houses have been being built along Roger Stevens and elsewhere there. So you know, it's almost like these other areas, whether we like it or not, may just develop faster than we think.
And that's entirely possible, and they can do that under the existing rules. Creating a new settlement area is a very significant undertaking that requires a lot of background study and work. And I would suggest that that's maybe something that council think about on the next review and not this one. I don't think that you would be able to rationalize it through this review, but I think with 5 years and the robust growth that you're having, you would have a much better chance of advancing that at a future date.
Okay, thanks. So I just have 2 or 3. I'll try to keep these short as I can. You talked about the linkage corridor, and when I was reading the report earlier, like I was wondering, how is the linkage corridors, or is it related at all to our tree bylaws, our tree cutting bylaws? Because really, you know, as you said, the linkage corridor is sort of attached to nature, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I don't think that there would be a direct correlation to your trees bylaw, Reeve. From talking to my biologist that did the mapping and going through the methodology that she used, the corridors are for the most part streams and creeks and things of that nature that are water courses, and that the corresponding bush on either side of the water course that may go through a farmer's field or something like that. So they're typically wild lands. There's no corridor that's open cleared land. They're bush, and they're mostly water courses.
Okay, thanks. And 2 more quick ones. This, you were talking about the source water protection zone, meaning the one that's north of Smith Falls. And you were saying how that it was going to become more clear what we could do with the business park. Do you feel that it'll be also more clear what adjoining people may or may not be able to do? Because like we've had many discussions with proponents outside of our business park about things they may wish to do or not wish to do or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's like an ongoing discussion. But is it going to be, do you think it's going to become a little bit more clear after we approve this OP, what those people can do or not do?
I think there's potential, yes, because these policies relate to the intake protection zone associated with your business park. Anybody else that's in that same zone would have the similar types of policies that they would have to deal with, and the similar types of restrictions: no pesticide use, no manure application, that type of thing. So it would help, Reeve, but it would be, you would have to infer it, right? It wouldn't be straight up and it wouldn't state it. But I think that with these policies now, it'll certainly assist Carl in his review of planning applications for the business park, as well as that general area.
Thanks. And my very last question, I promise, is regarding what you mentioned about the airport. And you were talking about that, I think that, there could be we could be admitting, a commercial, light industrial, whatever, businesses at the airport. But you said which were sensitive. I guess that's my question. What do you consider to be sensitive?
So the one thing that you want to do with airports and industrial uses is keep sensitive land uses away from them. And sensitive land uses typically mean houses, schools, hospitals, things of that nature. So institutional uses for healthcare and education, as well as houses. And so I think all we're doing is clarifying that the uses that would go into that area must be deemed to be compatible with an airport. And what we've tried to do is identify those uses that we know are compatible with an airport. And so it is something that we keep sensitive land uses away from those areas. And then we just have to double check when a new use comes in that it isn't sensitive.
Great, thanks. Any other questions, Jeff?
Thanks. Yeah, I think I only have about two, so that's I'll try to keep it short too as well. But I guess one of my first ones is just about the natural heritage features and the natural. We obviously have lots of wetlands and woodlands, and I'm curious of what that mapping looks like. You said you had a biologist working on that. Do we have like sort of updated mapping, or is it? Are we going to see? Anyways, I'll let you maybe jump in there.
Yeah, we do, Counselor. It's being provided. I don't think that I've done a good enough job to circulate it to you, but we will certainly circulate it following this meeting. The surprising thing is that, as I said earlier, your existing mapping was very, very good, and we've only sort of tweaked it. We didn't identify any new wetlands. There aren't any new ANSIs or anything like that. It's just the connections between the two that we've added in. But that mapping is available, and I'll make sure that each of you get a hard copy of that.
Okay, so we have a very good idea then of where we basically, for our growth and development, it'll give us a really good outline of what we can and cannot do, or how we can like look at situations that if there was some infringement on it. Like, are we allowed to have that in our official plan? Like, where like if say there's a big spot of on a well-maintained road and everything else, and we're looking at that for a subdivision, and and I'll make up an arbitrary number of 100 acres, but 15 of that is got woodlands and stuff that's sensitive. Is that something we can work on to look at to see like how we can make sure that we're still focusing on the home build and everything else? Because I mean I want to be environmentally sensitive, but also on the other side, I mean, there's obviously a giant push from the province to as well about our more homes and to build more and to make sure we're moving forward on that. So like, how do we play a balancing game, or is it literally just black and white?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a hard question. And I'll give my best effort, and Joanna and Carl, when you see me struggling, please jump in to save me. The balance between protection of natural resources and encouraging new investment is the art of the official plan, right? And I think that for every point that this amendment is saying there are constraints and you have to be aware of those constraints, there is equal wording saying that the township's open for business and this is how we're encouraging investment in our community. And I think that it's important that you have that balance. The other thing that's really important for council to appreciate is that if you have a natural feature, there are limits to what growth can or development can encroach into that area, but it's all about the proponent doing the environmental study, having the boots on the ground, taking the environmental resource information that's figured out from an air photograph at 30 or 3,000 feet and bringing it and putting boots in the ground and truthing what's there. And that's a really important step. And what happens through that is you get better understanding of the resource. And then you go from having 120 meter setback from a wetland down to a 30-meter setback, right? You go from having no development in the significant woodland to saying you can have, 6 houses in this area and it's not going to have an impact, right? So the important thing is to clearly identify where the resource is and then be able to do the studies and have clear direction on the studies so that Carl can give a report to you and you guys can make an informed decision as to how far you need to go to protect the natural resource versus encouraging new investment. That is the best I have for you there.
I appreciate that. I think that was good. I just have, sorry, one more question.
Yeah, hey, Jeff,
Yep.
maybe what I'm going to let, Carl had his hand up, so maybe he'll respond to what Forbes
Please.
said, and then I'll go back to you if I could.
Yes, please.
Thanks. Yes, Carl.
No, I think Forbes had an excellent answer. He put it better, certainly better than I could, and I'll just highlight a couple of experiences I've had both in Montague as well as in other rural municipalities where we've identified these features, identified the need to protect certain features, and we have tools available to us through zoning and through the subdivision process to strike that balance. So for instance, if somebody has, say, 100 acres that they'd like to subdivide, and 15 of those acres are identified through not only through our mapping, but through the environmental exercise that would have to happen, as if these areas are identified really as untouchable, they need to be protected, then one thing we could do is proceed with the subdivision for the other 80 acres. And I've seen examples where we've created a special zoning category for the lands that need to be protected, just have those set aside and allow us to proceed elsewhere. We've done that. I think there's been some examples even in Montague Township where we've looked at split zoning to protect areas that the environmental studies have identified that need to be protected while still allowing reasonable development to proceed elsewhere. And those are, that's an approach we take on a very site-specific basis to do, as Forbes indicated, to strike that important balance between accommodating good development and investment in our community and protecting the features that we need to protect.
Thanks, Carl. Back to you, Jeff.
I just have one more, and then I'll be free in. So the other one is just about the not the cluster, sorry, the cluster lot developments, and I'm kind of going back and forth about how I like the idea, obviously, but my biggest concern is the mandating of the private road side of things. And I understand that we want to be careful of what roads we take on and everything else, but I just wonder if that would, what the negative side of the deterrence away from that is. You said North Grenville had it in theirs and they've taken it out. Why would they take it out? Because did they see negatives to it? Is it working? And I realize, I think maybe this is trying to be new. Is this working, or does that create bigger problems to a township that could just literally send the plow down there when they need to and everything else, and it just be part of, like, that just gets turned over to like a municipal road like it would like a regular subdivision?
Yeah. Again, thank you very much, Jeff. That's a great question. The road costs are going to be the highest costs associated with this type of development, right? We're talking about 6 to 10 lots off a little cul-de-sac road. If that road is built to municipal standards, we have a fairly good handle on how much 100 meters of that road is going to cost. If it's developed at a private road standard, that cost is going to be cut somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50%, right? To develop a private road is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of half the cost of a road that's maintained and built up to township standards. So because the road is such a large cost component of the project, it was felt that it was important that it be a private road to be able to keep the costs down. The other thing that it does is it starts dealing with the economics of the municipality and the maintenance, right? So where if you took that same stretch of road, you would have one severance, right? And you would have one entrance. With a cluster lot, you still have that one entrance, but you've got 6 to 10 houses providing tax dollars to be able to say that this is a good financial deal for the municipality. This works. And then it would be a small little condominium corporation that would be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the road. And it's a model that I think it's important to have the private road as a central component to it. However, if there was a situation that came along and the municipality felt that you wanted to have a cluster lot development on a municipal stub road, I think you've got that discretion, right? But if it is a private road, it has to be a condominium. You can't have new private roads in Ontario that aren't condos. So that's the best I have for you on that, Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Ian?
There we go. Thank you, Reeve. I guess there's a couple of points, and I think Councillor Carroll touched the base on a couple of the last two ones. Actually, was a cluster, and I was one of the numbers about the roads and what does that look like for people? What does that look like for developers? Is it financially feasible? All those kinds of things. So if it's something that's not as I guess the manner in which the road has to be built is not to what a typical township road is, then I think that's great. I guess the other thing is when Councillor Carroll was talking about the sensitive areas, you're talking about biologists and all those other good things. Those would be brought to us, I guess, in a site plan, would they not? So every time if somebody goes proposes something and there's a sensitive area in there, that will be brought to council for council's approval at any point in time, would it not?
I'm assuming so. Yes, they would. The studies get triggered through a subdivision application a consent application, a zoning amendment application, or a minor variance, right? So there has to be a planning application that triggers the need for these studies, right? And if those applications come before council, you will get a chance to review them. If you've delegated the responsibility for commenting on severances to staff, you won't see them. So it depends on what you've said are the roles and responsibilities of staff versus council with the planning applications. Ian, but I think it's fair to say most applications would have studies, and if council wants to review them, they have the prerogative to do so.
Right, thank you.
Claus and then Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Reeve. Forbes, you mentioned earlier about development in the settlement in the hamlet areas. Of course, Rosedale would be the primary one. Are you suggesting that we should encourage more development off of Rosedale Road or along Rosedale Road?
Well, I would suggest it would be off Rosedale Road through plans of subdivision is what I'm recommending, Deputy Reeve. And that you minimize severances in those areas, because every time you have a severance in a hamlet, there's one less likelihood, there's one less lot that could be developed through a plan of subdivision. And so I think the best way is to have roads off of it and then development internal, and that the lots may back onto the county roads, but they wouldn't necessarily have direct frontage.
Yeah. Okay, I do agree with you. Strip development along a road is probably not a good idea.
That's one form of development that you should minimize and discourage if possible. It's not always possible, and sometimes there's unique circumstances where you're looking at a map and it looks like strip development, but when you actually get there, there's, you know, geography that changes the way you look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Claus. Karen?
My question has to do with what's our next step and
That's a
where
good
do we
one.
go from here?
I'm happy to answer that, Reeve.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jennings. That the next step after this evening is that we would circulate this draft to all the government agencies that we notified at the very beginning of the project and say, this is the end result of our discussions, and please review and provide comment. And we would also hold a public meeting to introduce the amendment to the broader community that participated at the beginning of this project as well, to highlight the changes that we're making to the plan. Once we have had that public meeting and those agency consultations, I would bring those comments back to you in a report, and there may be additional changes that are recommended or requested, or you may, after some sober second thought, want to modify or change some of the policies. Once that's done, we finalize the document. It gets adopted by Township Council, and then it goes to Lanark County for final approval. So the steps are agency consultation, public meeting, revise the amendment, adopt the amendment, send it to county for approval.
Follow up?
Okay.
Yes, yes, Karen.
Just looking for some clarification with reference to the public. How much notice are they going to have to be able to review the information, to be able to comment back?
That's a really good question, Councillor. Typically, it's a 20-day notice, but
Okay.
we can do a 60-day notice. We can provide notice and say that it's available for viewing on your website. We've had a really good website and it's got a lot of traffic. And so we can post it there for people to look at. We would certainly do that in advance of the public meeting, that as soon as the notice went out, we would certainly make sure that it's available on the website. But Councillor Jennings, the public consultation, there's the minimum under the Planning Act, and then it's up to you guys what you want to do, right? If you want to do more than the minimum, that is certainly there for you to give me direction.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yes, Claus?
Thanks, Reeve. Just one more quick question. When you talk, Forbes, about the public meeting, I think we talked about this before, and maybe put this out to the rest of the group. Is it possible for us, with social distancing and protocol in effect, to have this public meeting at the hall? Since we're talking a couple months before we get to that point.
I would say that we'd have to see what the protocol is being passed down from the province in 2 months' time, because at the moment it's what 5 indoors and 10 outside. So
I know, but and
sorry, I
what
cut
Forbes
you
was
off
saying,
there.
sorry. What Forbes was saying is that the public notice has to go out. We can make that 60 days or whatever. That puts us into the fall. So I was just hoping maybe that by that time things have really gotten a lot better. We're on a good road right now, that we could have a public meeting at the Rosedale Hall.
So what I would recommend, Deputy Reeve, is that we start with the Zoom. And if we find that things are changing quickly come sort of the 1st of September, we could cancel the Zoom meeting and reschedule a public meeting. I'm not opposed to changing gears partway through, given how things are very, very fluid, but I think we'd want to start with a Zoom meeting, schedule that, and then if as we're getting closer to that date, if we find that things are opened up and we can have in person, we would then cancel the Zoom and schedule a new in-person meeting.
Okay.
I'd like to make sure Carl and Joanna are okay with that suggestion as well. It's a little off it's not the norm.
I'm okay with that.
I think that they're both fine with it, Forbes. Now, I will call for any last minute questions, but I did have one more that I thought about earlier and I forgot to ask you, and that is that you were talking about the karst topography, and I guess I wondered, is that topography, is it public knowledge or is it sensitive to the point where nobody knows where it is?
Public knowledge, and it's recognized on your official plan schedule currently.
Yeah, okay, because I kind of just wondered, because there are certain areas that are not public knowledge.
You're absolutely correct. Particularly, Reeve, when you're dealing with species that are threatened and or endangered, there's a real reluctance to map that type of information. But with karst topography, it's a known geologic feature, and it's been mapped to the best of everybody's knowledge. And I think it's down in the southeast corner.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I don't see any other questions then. So thanks to all three of you, Joanna and Carl and Forbes, for all of the work so far on this. And we'll just kind of move on to the next steps, as you were asking, Karen. So I think we're all going in the same direction there. So that's great. Thanks. I'm going to, we do have a motion that was moved by Karen Jennings and seconded by Ian Straight, that the council receive the official plan review report and that the following be approved: that council accept the draft official plan amendment as amended for the 2020 to 2021 Montague Township official plan update for the purpose of public consultation and review, and direct staff and consultant planner to schedule the public meeting to solicit public comments on the draft OPA. Further, that the consultant planner be directed to circulate the draft OPA to the prescribed agencies for review and comment. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And well, this meeting is over earlier than I thought, so I guess you're pretty happy there, Ian, right?
It's a big hockey night in Canada.
Yeah. All right, so I do have the next motion. It was moved by Ian Straight and seconded by Klaus Vandermeer, that the minutes of the special meeting of the committee of the whole meeting of June the 8th, 2021 be approved as circulated. All in favor? Those are carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none. Moved by Klaus Vandermeer, seconded by Karen Jennings, that the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting of June the 15th, 2021 be approved as circulated. All in favor? Those are carried. Thank you. Any business from those minutes? Seeing none. Moved by Jeff Carroll, second by Karen Jennings, that bylaw 3846, 2021, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special meeting of council at its meeting held on June the 22nd, 2021, be read for a second and third time and passed, signed and sealed this 22nd day of June, 2021. All in favor? Those are carried. And before we adjourn, I'll ask Christy or Joanne if we have any questions from the public.
I have one.
Okay,
If Montague Township is the feeder of water for Merrickville and Kempville, why must we do hydro-G studies pertaining mostly to water and partially to soil content for building? Beckwith only does hydro-G studies for subdivisions, not individual services.
I think that there's a real change in terms of how hydro-G studies are done right now and when they're done. And there is a patchwork of policies. I'll acknowledge that. But I think that there is a consensus building on the correct direction. And it's something that the province has been letting municipalities and conservation authorities sort of work out themselves because it is unique to geography. I'm not familiar with the policies in Beckwith, and I couldn't speak to those. I do know other areas, jurisdictions, Lanark Highlands requires them for severances if they're smaller than a hectare in size, again, based on provincial rule. If there's multiple severances, and if you're in an area of already existing development. And this policy is meant to be a screening mechanism to assist people to know, both council and staff and the public, to know when they need to do this study. And right now there's not near enough direction, and you end up with situations where you've got lots that are created that then they find out there's bad water. And that's a situation that we should be making sure we can avoid at all cost.
thank you. Thanks, Barb, for that. Any other questions?
I don't have any questions for you.
Okay. And Joanna, are you checking?
Yeah, just checking for any last minute things here. Hold on for a sec. Yes, that's it.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay, thank you then. So good night to everybody. We're going to have our last motion here. It was moved by Karen Jennings and seconded by Ian Straight that this meeting do now adjourn at 7:21 p.m. until 6 p.m. or until the call of the brief, subject to need. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, good night, everybody.